Let's take a look at this Matos custom application. This is a customized application as part of the Matosphere project. In this custom application, we have a branch and box section. And what this demonstrates is the ability to deploy branches across the world in different locations, and then tie in various tools on the back end to automate the deployment of applications or Kubernetes clusters, multiple pieces. They could be single tier applications, multiple tier applications. These can all be custom applications, and have it all presented in a very simple single interface where you can grab information about the locations as well as grab information about the applications themselves. So what we see here in the upper left is a deployment catalog, which is a single button click piece to allow you to deploy an application or a cluster of Kubernetes nodes. In this case, we have a single tier application, we have a 2-tier application, we have a 3-tier application. This might be a web app DB type application. And then we have a cluster deployment as well. So this is a cluster that has a single master node and a single worker node within it. Down at the bottom left here, we have a request history, and this allows us to see all of the requests that we've made over time. We can see where they were requested at, so the different branch locations that are color coded, as well as the type of deployment that occurred. So this application deployments, Kubernetes deployments, time of deployment, and the description itself of the deployment. On the upper right side, we have a map of where the deployments are across the world, and these you can click on and they'll show you status of the deployment itself. So we have a deployment currently in San Diego, we have a deployment in San Antonio as well, and then we have a symbol here to indicate a mission control type center. That's where all the deployments are actually occurring from. Down in the bottom right, we have branch information. So in this case, we have 2 branches currently deployed, and in that branch information piece, we have the ability to see what are the instances running in that particular branch. If I click on San Diego, that will change, and I see I have a single application running in San Diego. In San Antonio, I have multiple applications and clusters running. And you can terminate the clusters by clicking on the terminate button. That will tear down the cluster or the application. We can also see status information. So you can see here as I click over to status, this is a branch that contains a Hyperflex cluster. I have the Hyperflex information, address information, critical information, operability, serial number information. I can click on a link here, and this will also take me into InnerSight. If I've already logged in, I can see the InnerSight information and the actual alarms that are related to what we saw on the page. So we can see here's the alarms that were related from that critical state. And then also we have the ability to see IPAM information or adjust IPAM information. So for each site, we have the ability to hook into an IPAM manager. And in this case, we're tapping into Netbox to pull data from Netbox and set data into Netbox for different types of IP address information for each site. So let's go ahead and create a deployment. So to do that, we can click a button. So I'm going to deploy a single tier application. And when I do that, basically it asks me, where do I actually want to deploy this application? So I'm going to deploy this in San Antonio, and I'll just give it a name, demo deployment, demo deploy. So when I hit confirm, what's going to happen is it's going to kick off in the back end to tell the applications to start deploying, or to start the infrastructure to start deploying that application. So what we should see here in the request history is an indicator that deployment has begun. And we see that that's shown up, and you see it blinking, and that indicates that deployment is in progress. We can also see on the back end that we got a WebEx Teams message saying that the application is deployed, and the deployment has begun. So if we go into some of the back-end infrastructure, we can see that deployment is actually occurring. So if I go into Cloud Center here, and I drop into the Workload Manager, which handles deployments, I can click on the Deployments tab, and I can see that deployment is started. So here it is starting, and this location, the vCenter default location, it is the indicator of my San Antonio location. So that deployment has begun, and it's in progress, and it's actually deploying that directly in the infrastructure where it's needed. In this case, it's going to be deployed on a vCenter cluster. So it's starting, and eventually this will go to fully deployed, and we'll be done there. Now, as part of this bring up, what we do is we kick off Action Orchestrator, and that talks to Netbox to let it know the IP address that was assigned, and that will put an entry right into Netbox saying that this IP address has been used now. So we have an integration here between Cisco's Cloud Center suite as part of that, the Action Orchestrator, and what that does again is allows you to take actions, run different workflows basically, and our workflow indicates to integrate with Netbox and make changes directly into the Netbox IP address infrastructure. So here I can go into Action Orchestrator and I can see the workflows that are being done. So these workflows are at the time of deployment. We can go in and view the workload, and it will send an HTTP request to let the Netbox know that that IP address has been assigned. So this is a very simple workflow that is very easy to manage through Cisco's Action Orchestrator. So let's close down Action Orchestrator here, and if we go back into the suite itself, back to Workload Manager, we should see that that deployment has now completed. So you can see here it's now deployed, so that has completed. I got a message in WebEx Teams indicating that the application is deployed. And now if I go back into the Matosphere Matos custom piece, we see that this request history is turned to solid green. The deployment is complete and the application is running. So we can also go back into instances and see that this application is running directly in San Antonio on the HyperFlex cluster that we set up as part of the deployments. So we can tear down that application very easily by just hitting the terminate button, and that will now go back into Cloud Center Suite and tear down the application as well and free up that entry in the IPAM entry. Now, if a user wants to add a branch, we have that functionality as well. So if I add a branch, I click the Add a Branch button, and I can paste in information about a new branch. So this branch is going to be located in Stuttgart, Germany here. And I'm going to enter some location information. As well as IP address information. And this is the IP address of the vCenter that I'm working with, as well as username and password information. And then finally, what we'll enter is the inner site information as well, to tap into the inner site infrastructure that's running in the back end here. So we'll pass in the inner site key as well as the inner site secret information. And if we submit, so that has now added a new branch into the infrastructure, and I say OK, and we see the branches listed here, and we can get information about the branch. There's no instances running on the branch yet, but then we can go ahead and start deploying applications and Kubernetes clusters right on the branch. The Kubernetes section is actually handled directly by Cisco Container Platform, so we can go ahead and do a deployment using CCP as well. If I click on this button here, I can see I'm going to deploy a single master in a single worker cluster. And I'm going to deploy this in San Antonio as well. So San Antonio is the only location that is supporting Cloud Center in our setup. So in that case, the drop-down box only allows us to deploy in one location. So you have a choice of where you want to deploy certain pieces of infrastructure on certain locations. So you might only want to have containerized information on a certain branch deployment. You can restrict that to a single location. So in this case, we've restricted to San Antonio. We're going to do a cluster deploy, and we'll kick that off. And that starts the deployment in the Cisco Container Platform. And if I log into CCP, I can see that that cluster deploy has started deploying, and you can see it's creating, and eventually that will deploy the master and worker nodes needed to get the cluster up and running, and eventually it will become fully ready and available for loading applications onto that. So that is the tie into Kubernetes as well. So you can see that it is in progress, it's deploying, it's a type of, the type is Kubernetes. As we hover over each of these different areas as well, we can see the status of each of these different pieces. So we had previously terminated this demo deploy, and you can see it's in the terminated state. This is in progress. This one is actually actively deploying it as we speak here. And then here we have running instances as well. So you can see these are running. The color codes for the sites allows us to see where each of these deployments are being deployed into. And if you don't understand the color code here, you can actually hover over and see this is being deployed in San Antonio. This was been deployed in San Diego, as well as hovering over the different icons to see what they indicate here. And this concludes the demonstration. This is what we're showing here is a very simple deployments, single button click deployments of different types of infrastructure, whether it's applications themselves or Kubernetes clusters, as well as infrastructure with branch deployments by just adding or removing branches. And that concludes the demo. Thank you.